Hello, everybody. Welcome to Steve and Dave's 50 Years Ago this month. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the week ending May 15th, 1971. Like all of the months this year, a fantastic month for music. And we're going to be getting to talk about that in just a little bit. At the beginning, I'd like to remind you that we have a playlist where all the songs are listed that we're going to be talking about. You may want to take a look at that if you're not familiar with some of the songs that we're talking about, or especially as I do, just to get reacquainted with some beloved oldies. To start off with today, we're going to just give a kind of a look back at what was going on in May 1971. There was one particular incident that kind of gives a flavor of what was going on at that time.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. So it's May 1971. The war in Vietnam is still raging. Nixon is president, and he has started the withdrawal. Nevertheless, the war remains extraordinarily controversial, and there are still thousands and thousands of Americans serving in Southeast Asia.
And in fact, we're going to have to talk a little bit about some of that controversy at the end today. But yes, this gives an idea of why that was so.
That's right. And so in this era, public protests against the war becoming, well, they were quite common, and oftentimes they were on an enormous scale. And so young people from across the United States gathered in Washington in early May. Gathered in the Capitol. Maybe as many as 35,000 were on the National Mall surrounding the monuments in peaceful protest against the war. Nixon, in collaboration with the DC government, decided to, take charge, decided to clean house, and instituted an enormous arrest of thousands upon thousands of these protesters. And in do so, he not only used the DC police, but also then mobilized the National Guard. And over the span of several days, these young people were arrested, largely for the crime of public protest, and were locked up across the DC metro area, to the point where they actually lost. They couldn't have any space. There was no space left, and so they started to kind of create these camps surrounded by chain link fence. They used practice facilities for local sports teams, for example, to incarcerate these young people. It was a debacle, and it is in fact the largest mass scale arrest in American history.
Yeah, they kept the ACLU busy. And
yeah, they did.
Yeah, they were literally carting them away by the truckload. Yeah, fantastic. And that wasn't even one of the largest Vietnam protests that took place in D.C.
No, it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. But again, the scale of the arrest was one of the things that made it most noteworthy. And this is the kind of thing that was happening with great frequency in the United States at this time. The idea that you had people who were in protest, and then you had this kind of pushback, this kind of law and order pushback. And so I think it's fair to say that in 1971, as was the case in 1970 and 69 and 68 and so on, that the United States was still deeply divided over the Vietnam War. And it was the great chasm in American life. And the May Day arrests in DC, I think, are a classic example of that chasm.
Well, and frankly, in 1971, if you were at a mass protest like that, you could be happy just to be arrested and not brutalized or killed. I mean, we had in the previous year almost.
Oh, that's right.
Almost to the month, right?
That's right.
Kent State. So you have to be willing to kind of put your body on the line to go out and protest.
I think that's right. And there were I think from Nixon's perspective, and I think from many political leaders' perspective, there was no political kind of liability for doing this. That in fact, what you did politically was kind of bolster your base. And so again, this is the era in Vietnam splits the country down the middle. So ironically, that the number one song in the United States continues to be the Three Dog Nights version of Hoyt Axton's Joy to the World. Dave, got a thought about Joy to the World, a quick thought. We've talked about it before. But.
Well, yeah, it was a real breakout hit for the Three Dog Night, and still one of their biggest things. So, been covered by all sorts of people.
Yes.
It was always, there was no thought of ever having a concert playlist for the Three Dog Night without it. It's a feel-good song, and it's a feel-good song that they almost didn't.
That's right. Yeah. So you have so Joy to the World at number one. At number two, it's those young lads from Gary, Indiana, who I think by this time had relocated to Southern California. It's the Jackson 5 with Never Can Say Goodbye.
Right, Never Can Say Goodbye. We've talked about what a powerhouse the Jackson 5 were. This was their sixth single, and it peaked at number two because Joy to the World blocked them out at number one for 3 weeks. So, unlike most of the other singles that they had released up until then, it did not make it to the number one slot. The only other single that they released that had not, that also only got to number two, was Mama's Pearl.
Mama's Pearl.
Which we've also talked about. But unlike Mama's Pearl, this is a really good song.
I agree. Yeah, that's right. I agree.
And it's also been covered by numerous artists, among others, Gloria Gaynor in '74 with this, a big hit. In fact, I think, Steve, you said this was her version that you associate.
Yeah, I think, it is the one I associate. I think I think in many ways it's one of Gloria Gaynor's signature tunes. But yeah, covered by people.
Yeah, the Communards, British, kind of a gay. Disco is not right, but it's a kind of a dance group. Had a fantastic version of it in '87. So I have not heard a bad version of this, but there's no doubt about it. The Jackson 5 also killed it. Just did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun to listen to. The writer was Clifton Davis. It was originally written for the Supremes.
Yeah.
But Diana Ross was no longer fronting it, and the Supremes were not getting the love from Motown that the Jackson 5 were.
I wonder why that would be, right? We've talked about this before, right? But the head of Motown, Berry Gordy, had a special affinity for Diana Ross. And
well, and apart from that, Diana Ross was the face of the Supremes. She was.
Oh, that's fair.
She was the star, and when she left the group, she took a lot of the appeal with it. It was talented people, and
yes.
do you have her replacement's name on the top of your head?
I do not.
I do not either. But also a very talented singer. So the talent was still there. It's just the love from Motown wasn't. It's interesting to point out, perhaps, that this was one of the few songs by the Jackson 5 that was not written by their go-to songwriting team that had Berry Gordy in it, of course, and the corporation. But anyway, that's number two.
There we go. So
by Jackson 5.
Yeah, there we go. And so at number three is the Canadian group Ocean with Put Your Hand in the Hand. And we talked a bit about this last month, but again, it's a wildly popular number in Canada. And in fact, I don't think it's overstating to say that it becomes almost a kind of anthem in Canada. And it remains, I think, an important song in Canada. But it's again one of those tunes from this era that had a kind of religious bent to it. And so in the early 70s in particular, the idea of introducing kind of religious imagery in a pop song was not only, I mean, it was kind of a ticket to kind of commercial success, interestingly enough. And so you have Ocean, who we'll never hear from again. There's the ultimate kind of one-hit wonder with Put Your Hand in the Hand.
Right. It's interesting to note that because that was kind of riding the wave of religious pop, it was covered by a slew of artists as well. Everybody from Anne Murray to Johnny Cash. So a very different time than like 5 or 6. Now, let's say maybe 4 years earlier,
Right.
when Brian Wilson was so proud because God Only Knows was the first time that a mention of God on the radio. So he was proud of bringing God to popular radio with that, but it didn't take long before God was riding the wave. You know.
That's right. There we go. And so you have Ocean at number 3. At number 4, it's the soft rock juggernaut, Bread, with one of their classics, and that would be If. Like many songs that Bread charted with, the writer here was David Gates. And I don't think there's any question that David Gates was the sort of the breakout figure in Bread. It was clearly the figure who was dominated the artistic output. He was I think, most commercially bankable writer, although other people in the group did write. Don't
you think, Steve, that Bread had the talent to go much farther than it did? My thesis is that David Gates was responsible for kind of a shooting star success for Bread, and they were hugely successful in the early years of the 70s. But after that, they broke up and didn't go anywhere. And all they did, essentially all they did, the only hits they ever had were these ballads. So
I think, I think that's right. I think the only exception to the soft rock formula for Bread would be a top 40 song called Mother Freedom. But other than that, these are, there is a kind of Bread, a Bread kind of recipe for the soft rock. So with this case, If is, it's a kind of nod to Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, If. I mean, there's a kind of sonnet-like kind of style to it. People admire the song. People admire the song's construction, even if you find it incredibly syrupy, which I tend to do. There is a certain craftsmanship in the writing, in the lyrics, in particular, that makes If, I think, an interesting song. To your point, though, about Bread and how far they could have gone, I think Bread did chart. I had made a note of it here. Bread did put 6 songs in the top 10. They did have, really, that's enormous success. But I also think that it was a group that was so dominated by Gates that the other members just kind of, this is what happens, I think, in groups, particularly when you have a breakout member. And so they did break up in 73, 74. They regathered themselves in 75, 76 for just a short period of time. But I don't know. I'm not sure how far Bread could have gone beyond what they did.
Well, they had Larry Knechtel join the group, and I think it was late '70. It was after the first hit, but they had talented musicians. They had talented writers.
Yeah, and
they certainly could have done. They could have expanded their palette, and
I think that's fair. No, I think that's fair. And to the point about the talented musicians, they were a really good live band. There aren't a lot of live recordings of Bread, but the ones that are, they're really good. They're really solid. They're a really tight band, and actually they could really rock it. Again, I'll mention this Mother Freedom song that becomes popular in a few months. But I don't know. there is a certain kind of sameness to Bread. They were the classic singles band. There are a zillion compilation albums of Bread. And so I think this came, for example, from the LP Mana. I don't know that anybody does much deep diving when it comes to Bread LPs, if any. But I mean, their singles are, they were successful, and they have, I think, largely stood the test of time. And I definitely think that this is one of them. It's at number 40.
Well, it's hard to imagine what proms and homecomings would have taken for a theme
Oh, jeez.
in the early '70s and to mid '70s if this song had not been there.
No kidding. Oh my Lord. If you think about that, yeah, how many homecomings had a Bread theme song? So you have this song at Bread with If at number 4.
Well, just one question.
Go ahead.
You which is more cloying for you, If or Let It Be? Because I know you're a big
Well,
fan.
it's it would it's probably Let It Be. But it's close. I think Let It Be is wretched. But I mean, if yeah, there we go. If gets on my nerves as well. But I actually think that If is a little bit more clever than Let It Be, for what it's worth.
Well, not one to shy away from controversy.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't think I'm alone on my island, my Let It Be island by any stretch. But anyway, okay. So let's get to number 5 because this is a very interesting song. And an interesting performer. I think a kind of underrated performer. And it's Lobo with Me and You and a Dog Named Boo.
Right, Lobo, the artist's name of Kent Lavoie, and Me and You and a Dog Named Boo was his first hit from the album Introducing Lobo.
Yeah.
And Kent Lavoie, well, not that it's relevant to anything, but he really had a face for radio.
That's harsh, man.
Well,
come on.
just say it like it is. But that didn't stop him from doing live performances and taping live performances. But boy, anyway. He had a number of hits, and I wasn't aware that he was responsible for all these. But I really liked a lot of his output. This was his second most successful single after "I'd Love You to Want Me."
Yeah.
Which also very nice song.
Yeah.
He also had top 40 hits with "Don't Expect Me to Be Your Friend."
Mm-hmm.
I have very ambivalent feelings about the lyrics there, but and "Where Were You When I Was Falling in Love," a song that I'm really not familiar with, but it was another one of his top 40 hits.
Yeah, a little more poppy. Yeah.
He started his musical career in 1961 in a local Tallahassee band. He came from Tallahassee, Florida. He wrote this song, "Me and You and a Dog Named Boo," in Tallahassee. But he started off with the Rumors with Graham Parson and Jim Stafford.
Now, okay,
were in one band in Tallahassee. Just a
hang
local
on a sec. Okay, so you say Graham Parsons,
Jim Stafford, and
Jim Stafford of
Lobo. Lavoie. I love Jim Stafford.
Well, I think Graham Parsons is super interesting too. That's why
Jim Stafford was kind of the king of the novelty song, right?
Yeah, Wildwood Weed and
My Girl Bill.
My Girl Bill, yeah. He had a variety show for a while too on ABC, I think. But that's quite an assemblage of at least personalities. Nothing else.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. He wrote this song sitting in Tallahassee. And for the longest time, he was trying to come up with a rhyme for "you and me." It doesn't sound like it'd be that tough. Make it a dog named Glee or whatever. But in the end, because he wanted it to be grammatically correct, you don't put yourself. So "you and me,"
No.
But he overthrew that. And while he was writing this, while he was struggling with this, his German Shepherd came wandering into the room, whose name was
Oh, come on.
Boo.
Oh, come
Yes,
on.
yes. And so that's
Wow.
so. All of a sudden, the floodgates opened, and he just wrote the thing. So that's the story of the writing. And he said he'd never been to these other places, these exotic places like Los Angeles and where was it? St. Paul, Minnesota, and these were faraway places that
Right.
people doing a lot of traveling would see. He had been to Georgia from
Yeah.
Florida, not a huge trip, but so he just made these things up and made it part of his narrative.
Yeah, makes the song work. It's a kind of travel log. It's, there's a kind of, on the road feel to it. It's
I loved this song.
wow.
I really enjoyed
Yeah.
listening to this back in the day. This was covered by, get this, Perry Como
Yeah.
and the Brady Bunch kids
Oh, God.
during the in their cartoon series.
How dare you put Perry Como and Brady Bunch kids in the same sentence?
Man, I
I'm
didn't do
standing up for Perry
did.
Como. Unbelievable.
It's these are people who covered the song. So
Yeah, well,
anyhow, so there's that. Number 5, Me and You and a Dog Named Boo by Lobo.
well. So at number 6 we have the world's greatest rock and roll band. So they say, and so many believe. It's the Rolling Stones with Brown Sugar. Now, the Rolling Stones have obviously been around for a long time. They formed in the early 1960s, and they still, on some level, are a viable enterprise. It is also the case that they had massive chart success in the United States. Massive chart success. They put scores of songs in play. They had 8 number 1 hits in the United States, including Brown Sugar. Brown Sugar comes from the Sticky Fingers LP. I know amongst Stones aficionados, Sticky Fingers is considered one of the best LPs. It is, considered a kind of classic. It also comes from the Stones period where Mick Taylor was a part of the group. And for my money, when Mick Taylor replaced Brian Jones, that roughly 4-year period is when the Stones are at their creative peak. I think, well, Mick Taylor didn't write much. In fact, he didn't hardly write at all for the Stones. His playing is sublime, and the way he was able to, Keith Richards and Mick Taylor were able to feed off of each other, really, I think, made the group exciting. Brown Sugar, however, is arguably the Stones' most controversial song. And the lyrics were written by Jagger. And Jagger has talked about this a great deal. And in a sense, he thinks that he would not have been able, he was surprised that he wrote the song. He's surprised that he wrote the song the way he did, because the song references many topics of controversy, interracial sex, slavery, oral sex, violence, maybe even sadomasochism. It is, there's a lot there in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And in fact, when Jagger sings the song, he actually, today he censors himself a bit. He doesn't use, for example, this line rarely appears in concert. Hear him whip the women just around midnight. He rarely sort of utters that. Today, it's a song that really moves. It is, I think it's one of their best songs by a long stretch. And the combination of a kind of rockin', kind of pulsating kind of beat, along with these really quite strong lyrics, make Brown Sugar, well, it cemented the Rolling Stones' reputation as the bad boys of rock, right? That it's hard to imagine the Beatles. It's hard to imagine any group singing about these kinds of topics in this kind of bold way. But that's what the Stones do, apparently. And so this became really a staple in the Stones repertoire. And today, decades after its release, Brown Sugar remains, part of the set list for the Stones.
And apart from the lyrics, um, Brown Sugar is actually a drug reference.
Right.
Don't ask me how this works because I have no idea about this sort of thing. But it's a form of heroin. The heroin you could get heroin in brown sugar cubes. I always thought it was something you melted and shot up, but perhaps it's also possible to take heroin orally. I don't know, but it was brown sugar was also a heroin reference.
I mean, yeah, and to that point, I think to some degree, you name it, you can find it in at least an allusion to it in this song. I mean, so the origin of the song, and there's some debate about this. At the time, Jagger was in a relationship with Claudia Lanier, who was one of the former ICAT, and Bill Wyman is pretty firm in his contention that this relationship with Lanier is sort of the origin of the song. Jagger, of course, is a bit more circumspect about this, but I think you're right, Dave, that the song sort of dips its toe into so many sort of very controversial areas that it makes it kind of unusual to think about it being such a big hit. It really is it's a kind of central song in the Stones' legacy. And the fact that it was enormously popular and that it's the kind of thing that would have been played at junior high dances in 1971 and this kind of thing, and it's still the kind of thing that you hear on the radio and oldies radio all the time. It's interesting, right? That so much of the topic matter that is clearly being addressed here, some of the stuff that's really clearly being addressed here, people just sort of kind of put it aside because the song really rocks. People don't,
You know what? I never understood that until I started talking to my daughters about music, and I talk about this song has great lyrics. Lyrics. We don't listen to lyrics. I like the song too, but I have no idea what it says. This is why they can get into K-pop, because it doesn't matter that they don't understand. You know. I think probably a lot of people just don't listen to lyrics. They just, it's just the voice is just another instrument.
Well, I think that's really an interesting point. I think a key point. I do think in this era, in the 1970s, people paid attention to lyrics in part because I think the popular culture was smaller, and I think popular music was, I think, more important in the popular culture. I also think that this is a function of albums and liner notes in albums, and the fact that you could actually sort of read them. There are also, back in the day, were magazines that were devoted to song lyrics, so that if in fact the lyrics of your particular song weren't on the album, you could buy these magazines and figure out what was being said. And so maybe that's a part of it as well. There really was a lot of attention paid to lyrics in the 1970s, a lot of attention, and people spent a lot of time analyzing lyrics. I mean, that seems sort of odd, but like with a Stone song like this, people would have played Sticky Fingers and listened to it very closely. I mean, very closely. And I think Brown Sugar, is a song that, would be a surprising one to a lot of people. There's a lot of that. There's a lot there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just one more thing before we move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about the Stones. You talked about their popularity in the States. If the United States loved the Stones loved the United States even more, even before
yes.
even started. There are few groups that are such music nerds for American soul and American gospel, American, jazz.
Oh, absolutely.
They were huge fans of
100%.
Especially black music, especially the stuff coming out of Chicago, New Orleans. They were absolute trivia buffs, and yeah.
I mean, it goes to the name of the group itself, which is, you know, a classic song from the blues. That when their first visit to the United States, they made the pilgrimage to Chess Records, right, in Chicago. Um, you're right. I mean, they were deeply steeped in Americana, but actually even before they ever got here. There's no question about that. I just want to say one other thing about the song
I
itself.
think what
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the perks for them, one of the many perks of becoming huge stars, was that they were able to meet their idols and to play with them. I
Right.
think they just love the shit out of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And one last thing about the song itself is that it features, of course, this great sax solo. That's Bobby Keys, who played on so many Stones albums.
We will talk a little bit about Bobby Keys later today.
Oh, how about that? And also on piano is Ian Stewart. And a word about Ian Stewart. Ian Stewart was an original Stone. He was pushed out of the group by the Andrew Lloyd Webber, their first manager. Um, and but Stewart always had a role to play in many Stones recordings. And of course, this comes as no surprise that Richards maintains that the song was written in 45 minutes. And so, you know, that's how these things oftentimes would go. But you have the classic Brown Sugar at number 6. At number 7, boy, it's Aretha Franklin. She's at the height of her powers in the early 1970s. She is on the R&B charts. She's all over the pop charts. She is singing songs, original songs written for her. She is doing so many covers. In fact, the covers that Aretha Franklin does in this era, she basically kind of makes the songs their own and her own. And to that point, then at number 7, you have her version of "Bridge Over Troubled Water." It is, of course, the Paul Simon song made famous by Simon and Garfunkel a couple of years earlier. It peaks at number 6 on the pop charts, but I think the important thing here is that Aretha Franklin is to some degree sort of giving her stamp on the song, and I think it's easy to underestimate her a little bit in a way. She was a dominant force in popular music for 50 years. I mean, she charted and she was considered sort of the diva's diva for half a century. She's an incredible performer who also, I think, had a really interesting ear, a discerning ear. And Aretha Franklin, when she decided to record a cover, in this case, the Simon song, just, you know, took it to a different kind of level, and just remarkable figure in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that she won a Grammy for this, and like in 1970, the Simon and Garfunkel just cleaned up with their Bridge Over Troubled Water. I think they took 7 Grammys. It was
That
incredible.
sounds right. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
it's obviously an amazing song. But
she also got one.
yeah, she did. And I mean, Aretha Franklin put 17 songs in the pop charts. In the pop charts, 17 in the top 10. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just amazing. She passed away in 2018, but I don't think there's any question that her voice was the voice, and she is very much at the height of her powers in the early 1970s. And Aretha Franklin is just everywhere, just an amazing performer. So there you have her at number 7 with.
I think the last live performance of hers I saw was at the Kennedy Center.
Yes.
At the tribute for Carole King.
That
sang "Natural Woman," I believe.
And she also played the piano. Do you recall this?
She played the piano.
She comes out. Maybe we'll put this in the playlist. She comes out in in a big coat, and then she takes the coat off and she sits at the piano, and it's like, what? And then she starts to play, and then she just, oh my God, she just brings down the house. Yeah, it's an extraordinary performance. She was.
Yeah, Carole King was clearly very, very moved, and
no, it's awesome.
It was neat.
No, absolutely. We'll definitely include it in the playlist. At number 8, I'll be interested in your take on this. It's the Bells with Stay a While.
All right, so that makes us the second Canadian song in our list.
There we go.
The Bells came from Montreal, a Canadian soft rock group, and this, as we said before, this was kind of a time when soft rock was extremely popular. We had Bread, we had Carpenters out there, so the timing was good. Um, when I saw "Stay a While" on the list, I could not place it. I could not remember the song. It's the only song in the top 10 that I was not able to call up in my memory. And
I
then
have to me too. Me
yeah.
too.
Then I listened to it, and that explains why, because it's not a very memorable song, but it was incredibly successful. I mean, they sold
Sure.
like 4 million records, and it was of course, Canadian hits are always bigger in Canada, unless you have a group like Guess Who or something like that, who also makes it to number one. But Canadian hits always do better, and that's no exception here. It actually peaked at number 7 on the Hot 100 list, but it made it to number 1 in Canada. It was a duet with Jackie Ralph and Cliff Edwards, her brother-in-law.
Yeah.
It was written by Ken Tobias. Have you ever heard of him?
It doesn't ring a bell, no.
He's something of a celebrity, kind of a mid-sized celebrity in Canada.
Okay.
Worked with a lot of Canadians. Worked with Ocean, who we've also
Yeah.
talked about.
Right.
Anne Murray, So did a lot of work over a couple of decades in the music scene in Canada. We had Frank Mills on piano. Does that name ring a bell to you? Frank Mills?
It doesn't, although maybe a session player. I'm sorry, I don't know.
He had a solo hit in 1979 with Music Box Dancer.
Dancer. That's right. Okay.
The instrumental.
I remember that. Right.
That's really the only thing that's particularly notable about this hit. But they were awarded a gold record on May 27th, 1971.
Okay.
So 4 million copies worldwide. Stay a While by the Bells.
Good for them. So quick question. Let's just take a brief aside. So it's mid-May 1971. Who might be on Rolling Stone? Now, don't overthink it. It's a very popular movie, a very youth-centered movie from I think roughly this time, involving motorcycles. Oh, come on. You got this. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Fonda.
Okay, so Peter Fonda of Easy Rider.
Yeah. So just so if it's so, Dave, just why would Peter Fonda be on the cover of Rolling Stone in May of '71? What's going on there, you think?
Well, geez, obviously his sister Hanoi Jane
Yes. Yeah.
was making waves
For sure.
in the late '60s, early '70s. He had a breakthrough hit with Dennis Hopper and Easy Rider in
He did, absolutely.
'68 or '69.
Yeah, late. Yes, '69.
One of those, '68 or '69.
Yeah, yeah.
Why he would be on the cover?
Well, he was yeah, it's a good and I don't really. It's at this point, and there's really nothing to point to. I mean, he's in a film, but it's largely that he is considered kind of a spokesman of a generation. That also in this article features in an article about Dennis Hopper. But the thing is that Peter Fonda had sort of this one brief moment, right? Easy Rider. I mean, I think he won an Academy Award for Uli's Gold some 25 years later. But I think it's fair to say that if it's the early 1970s, you know, it would be Peter Fonda, it would be Jane Fonda, who would be somehow, you know, tied to the counterculture, to be sort of like have the pulse of America's young people, this kind of thing. And it's interesting that the Fonda's success is based basically off of kind of one movie, Easy Rider, and really little else. And he rode that way for a long time, but he was an extraordinarily important person.
Made a couple other motorcycle movies, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And a couple other drug inspired movies.
that's right.
That was kind of his niche. Um, I would not have recognized him from that cover. The Was he wearing a construction?
Construction hat,
Yeah.
working working class hero, which we'll talk about
Well,
in a bit. But
yes, but that strikes me as an ironic comment because like
oh,
there had been that riot in New York, right? Anti protests protests where the construction workers came in by the hundreds and just beat the shit out of some anti-Vietnam
no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's you know, the one hat that somebody would not who would hate Peter Fonda, that hat would be a construction hat, right? And so here he is, you know. So there he had. I just wanted to, the Rolling Stone, you know, at mid 1971 with Peter Fonda on the cover.
Yeah, well, interesting.
So here we go. So at
Dr. Hook hadn't been on there yet.
that's right, yeah, the cover of the Rolling Stone. So at number 9, you've got this dynamo, right? It's Neil Diamond with I Said.
I Said,
You got some thoughts about this?
and B-side Done Too Soon.
Done
All
too
right,
soon. Okay.
because Done Too Soon is also often included in his best hits anthologies and so on. But I am going to talk about I Said.
Okay, that's fine.
Some interesting stuff about that. This was from his Stones album,
Yeah.
and on the album begins with the first half of the song and ends with the second half. And these two halves are then put together for the single, which is an interesting idea. This is at number 9 this week, but it actually peaked at number 4.
Yeah.
It was released March 15th, so had a fairly rapid rise. Neil Diamond was a known quantity by that point.
Absolutely, yeah.
A proven hit maker. This was an intensely personal song of his. It took him 4 months to write. And apparently it came out of some work that he had been doing in therapy. Interestingly, another thing that he was trying to work through with this was a failed audition for a Lenny Bruce movie biopic.
Oh, is that okay? That's the one that
He that I assume the one that Dustin Hoffman ended
that's when Hoffman, yeah.
doing, yes. But he had done a screen test for that and failed, and he put a lot of his blood and soul into that screen test. Had really prepared for it, and apparently the act of like getting into Lenny Bruce's head and trying to become that person kind of threw him off for a while. And that's I don't know if there's a direct causal connection to the therapy that he went through then.
Yeah.
But it all plays a role. This is all something that he was working through with I Said. So there's that. Another interesting thing about this is the reception. which was largely positive. But one negative reception is just so classic that I have to go into it a little bit.
Yeah, please share. There we go.
Um, Dave Barry did a column about bad songs. And in this column, he would talk about this song. This led to publishing a book of bad songs. But first of all, this initial column, talking about I Am, I Said, quote, "It would not trouble me if the radio totally ceased playing ballad-style songs by Neil Diamond. I realize that many of you are huge Neil Diamond fans, so let me stress that in matters of musical taste, everybody is entitled to an opinion, and yours is wrong. Consider the song I Am, I Said, wherein Neil, with great emotion, sings, 'I am, I said, to no one there, and no one heard at all, not even the chair.' What kind of line is that? Is Neil telling us he's surprised that the chair didn't hear him? Maybe he expected the chair to say, 'Whoa, I heard that.' My guess is that Neil was really desperate to come up with something to rhyme with there, and he had already rejected 'So I ate a pear,' or 'Like Smokey the Bear,' and 'There were nits in my hair.'" Okay, end quote. The response of the hate mail to that was so overwhelming that he had to, he combined them all into one all-purpose Neil Diamond fan hate letter beginning, "Dear Puke Nose." In the end, he offered a public apology. "Please stop writing. You've convinced me. Neil is a music god. I worship Neil on a daily basis at a tasteful shrine to him erected in my living room. I love all the songs Neil sang to us, not to mention all the songs he brang to us." End quote. I just love it.
Yeah, it's well, I think Barry's right about this one. This song is so labored and so forced. It feels like it was a 4-month effort.
Oh, I love this song. It's an absolute anthem. Well, I know you're a Neil Diamond fan too. You don't care for this is one of the songs that for me makes him a legend.
Wow.
That's basically all I have.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, it really is.
I am curious though about so you talk about it being on the album and it was the opening couple minutes and the last couple minutes and they I guess apparently brought it together for the single. Do you know more about that? That seems to me really well. Obviously, that seems really unusual. It also seems to be sort of kind of commercial suicide in a way. But so is the idea then thematically then that this song sort of leads into the album and the themes of the album, and then it provides sort of the outro for the album. I'm just curious, why they put it together for the single, or was that always the intention? I mean, what do you think if you don't?
Good question. My guess is that they always intended to release that as a single because it's an incredibly strong song and one that he clearly cared very much about.
Yeah.
But because of that personal connection, he probably also felt like that was a good set of bookends for the album.
Well, it's just interesting.
But it's all speculation.
Yeah, I mean, if you buy the album and expect to hear the song, you really kind of don't. It's I just think that I've not heard of that before. I just think that's an interesting kind of approach. I don't know if interesting is a word, but okay. So you've got Neil Diamond, a song that you love at number 9. I Am, I Said. Oh my Lord. So number 10. At number 10 is Chickaboom. Don't just love it by
just love it
by Daddy Dewdrop. I was unfamiliar with this song, so as we are wont to do, I spent some time with it. It is horrendous. It is a part spoken word. It's part comedy. It's part kind of funky, kind of R&B. There's a certain kind of bounce to it. It peaked. It peaked at number 9. Daddy Dewdrop is the moniker for Richard Monda, an American songwriter. who plied his trade primarily in cartoons. And so just a moment with this, right? So if it's the early 1970s, there are three major television networks. And those three major television networks give over their Saturday morning programming to kids. It's primarily cartoons and this kind of thing. And there are 5 hours of programming each Saturday in each network. These cartoons were most half hour long. There were songs in many of them. And so it did employ lots of writers and lots of songwriters and lots of musicians. And so Fonda initially composed Chick-a-Boom for the CBS classic, The Groovy Ghoulies. The Groovy Ghoulies in 1970, 1971 was a kind of take on if popular culture had a kind of, I don't know what, a kind of ghoulish feel to it. And so you had these groups like the Spirits of 76, the Rolling Headstones, so on, the Mummies and the Puppies. And so anyway, Fonda was a part of this. Originally, this song was going to be in the show, but he decided to release it as a single. And Chick-a-Boom became really a big deal. I know, Dave, you seem to have an affectionate, you like this song, I guess, even.
I do just love it.
Oh, oh, it's really something. And again,
I think it's a lot of fun.
Well, there you go. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so the surprising thing is that, I mean, I get its appeal, but it really was popular. I mean, it sold a lot of records, and this is the last thing that the Fonda did on the charts. But Daddy Dewdrop's Chick-a-Boom, I don't have much more to say than, don't you just love it? It's not going to be on the playlist. You may be unfamiliar with it, and if you can bear it, I'd encourage you to listen to it because you won't quite believe it. But there you go. Let's cherry pick from a couple more songs from that are popular in this mid-May time period, and at number 15 is the saintly John Lennon, right? It's interesting, right, that we've heard from lots of Beatles up to this point, but we haven't heard much from John Lennon in terms of single output. But at number 15 is the song "Power to the People." So
well, we have talked about Lennon in the show with Instant Karma.
You're right. That's right.
About a year ago, actually.
That's right. Okay.
Which was also produced by Phil Spector.
Yeah.
Spector gets producer credits along with Lennon and Ono for "Power to the People." It was released as a single and did not appear on an album until the Greatest Hits anthology, Shaved Fish.
Shaved Fish, yeah.
The B-side was "Open Your Box" in the UK, and "Touch Me" in the US, and both of those were by Yoko Ono. So Lennon got the A side and Yoko got the B side. This is a very simple song. It's essentially a protest chant.
Yeah, the chant.
Much more to it than that. Power to the people, right on. And this gets repeated again and again. And the amazing thing about this is, for me, for such a simple song, and not even a particularly compelling in any sense. It's a chant.
Yeah.
But they have some incredible people working on it, right? On bass, Klaus Foreman.
Mm-hmm.
You're familiar with Klaus, right? Can you
I
say
am.
a little bit about him?
Yeah. So Klaus Foreman was a friend of the Beatles. He knew the Beatles when they were in Hamburg. So this would have been the earliest incarnation, really just after Ringo Starr had joined the band, and was one of their pals in Hamburg. Klaus Foreman was not only
he shared an apartment with Ringo and George after
yeah
Paul and John had moved out.
That's right. He was also had, in addition to playing bass and other stringed instruments, he also was an artist. He famously then inked the Beatles Revolver LP, along with other. He did other album designs. He's a very, very interesting guy, but and he's a kind of almost a Zelig-like figure that he appears in lots of different places. And if you look at the liner notes of a wide variety of songs, you'll see Klaus Foreman on bass. Yeah.
And you'll see him on bass in all three non-bass Beatles solo projects.
Yeah.
I think he's credited on bass in every one of theirs, but I won't go that far. But he was everywhere, and if they did an album, they would often have Klaus join them. In fact, there was some talk about continuing on as a group with Klaus on bass instead of Paul,
right.
after Paul left the group, and it would have been called the Ladders. Obviously, that never came to fruition, but it's also obvious that the Beatles, all the Beatles, Paul included, held him in very high esteem.
I think that's right. Yeah, yeah. Who else is
And it wasn't just the Beatles. Like you said, it's
no, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Was,
but he was oftentimes considered a kind of not necessarily a member, but maybe a kind of member in waiting. And this went on. I mean, for years, right? That if there would be any kind of rumor about a so-called Beatles reunion or partial Beatles reunion, Foreman's name would oftentimes come up. It's true.
Well, and John even said, if the three of us, George, Ringo, and John, were ever to do a concert together as the ex-Beatles, so to speak, Klaus would be the guy that we'd have playing on
Sure.
bass.
Yeah.
So there's this guy, right, on bass. We have Billy Preston on keyboards. We've already had an opportunity to talk about Billy Preston. See him on the Let It Be film.
Right.
So obviously, he's everywhere as well. A very talented pianist and keyboardist.
Right.
He's working on it. Bobby Keys, who we've already mentioned
Yep.
in connection with Brown Sugar. He was the sax player in just about every tour in the 70s and in the 80s.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
He was briefly fired in the mid 70s by Paul McCartney, by Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
After he had filled a bathtub in a hotel room with Dom Perignon,
Jeez.
which basically cost more than he, like double as much as he would have earned for that tour.
Well, that's very well.
And drank most of it. But that's just incredible. I mean,
Good for him.
the level of decadence and
Well, but
yeah, that's rock star level.
that's rock star level. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, and I guess maybe this is Mick's point. You're not really a rock star. You're part of the entourage. You're part. You're a backup player. But yeah, Keys was a go-to guy. Though he appeared like you're suggesting on dozens of well-known songs. He played with everybody.
Well, Keith Richards said the way he got him back into the good graces of the band, or specifically of Jagger, was he said, "Look, you come. We're doing some practice runs, and you just show up, and when we go into Brown Sugar, you just come in and play." And that's what happened.
Yeah.
It just, came out of the blue, and Jagger heard that, and so Keith Richards said, "Well," and Jagger said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "You can't argue with that. You just can't argue with that." So
Right.
okay.
Take it
So,
easy.
you know, great stories surrounding Bobby Keys. And of course, he worked with all sorts of people too. But what he was best known for was the sax player for the Stones.
That's right.
Jim Gordon on drums.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, was he in? Yeah, he played on lots of things. He played with many of the Beatles. He played with Harrison as well, I think. Was Jim Gordon in? Was he in Traffic? And in
He did tour with Traffic. He appeared on 2 of their albums,
yes,
including the Low Spark of High Heeled Boys.
yes.
He was on the Joe Cocker Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour.
Yeah, there we go.
He was part of the rhythm section for Derek and the Dominoes. Played on All Things Must Pass. He played on Pet Sounds with the Beach Boys. He was perhaps, after Hal Blaine, the most occupied drummer, sessions drummer,
Yeah,
in the '60s,
yeah.
which is really saying something.
Big name for sure.
He was also on Nilsson's album. Played in Frank Zappa's Grand Wazoo big band, the 20-piece big band.
It seems. Yeah, that's right.
The subsequent 10-piece Petite Wazoo band.
Of course.
When introducing him on stage, Zappa would refer to him as Skippy because of his youthful appearance.
Well, there you go.
He played on Steely Dan's Pretzel Logic,
Okay.
including Ricky Number.
Oh yeah.
And he played drums on 3 tracks of Alice Cooper's Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, which is a fine album. So
Yeah.
that's that. All his talent, right? And all he does with it is a little musical chant.
Well, so that, okay. So let's think about this for just a second, because John Lennon, right, in 1971, is one of the most famous people in the world. He is. I mean, how do you even describe? What does Lennon do in this era? I mean, he does record some music, but his job is almost. I mean, I don't know. Just to be famous, he appears everywhere. He comes on the Dick Cavett show. He eventually will guest host the Mike Douglas show for a week. He is. I don't know. He's a kind of cultural figure who has kind of political leanings. I mean, but I don't know. But what does Lennon stand for in this era beyond sort of peace and love? I mean, I think I'm not trying to denigrate him, but I just think that there is this sense that he is a star, and within his orbit, then all these people are drawn close to him. Musicians, politicians, movie stars, wannabes, hangers-on, and he has this interesting orbit of people, people around him. It's a fascinating kind of thing, an odd kind of thing, actually.
Well, yeah, I this is of course pre-meltdown.
Yes.
And I think maybe there's a sense, and I'm sure that Yoko Ono had a lot to do with this, like as she did have with the artistic output of Lennon based on the time that they met. But just a sense, you are this big. What are you going to do with the influence that you have? Are you going to use it for something, or are you just going to, And I think that's what was going on.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's well said.
The whole bed in and all of that stuff. So he did say afterwards, in retrospect, he didn't think the song really worked. I would agree with that. He agreed with Hunter S. Thompson, who said that it came 10 years too late. Lennon wasn't entirely satisfied with it himself, but there it is. We had Phil Spector as producer, Foreman bass, Preston keys, and Gordon on drums, and you have a musical protest chant.
Yeah, I know. It's there we go. But such was the nature of the pop charts in 1971. that you would have on, you'd have these songs from all over, right? Just, every possible genre, it would seem. You have like this protest chant from Lennon, and then a little bit higher up on the charts, you'd have this kind of protest chant in a way for a more kind of conservative bent. Because at number 40 in mid-May of 1971 is the Battle Hymn of Lieutenant Calley by C Company and featuring Terry Nelson. We have included in the reading list this week a number of articles about Meli. And so we probably should, because this Lieutenant William Calley was convicted of what was known at that point as the Meli Massacre, we probably should just maybe talk a little bit about Meli before we get to the song.
But, yeah.
Go ahead.
But I will say that for people who aren't familiar with the incident, I think there should be a trigger warning for any
I think that's
readings. It's horrendous. It's something that you will not be able to get out of your head once it's in there. So
no, that's right. No, I think that's an appropriate kind of warning, Dave. Meli takes place. Meli is a hamlet in Southeast Asia, in South Vietnam. In March of 1968, Charlie Company is given a task to enter this village and to find perpetrators, to find members of the enemy, and they are warned going in that the enemy, the Viet Cong, have been aided by people in the village, including women and children, perhaps. There's a lot of fog that surrounds this, and I guess one of the things we should note going in is that there were, while Meli is a horrific episode, there were lots of Melis. I mean, this kind of activity was not uncommon. The Charlie Company goes into Meli and begins to lay waste to the village, destroying the village physically, burning structures and this kind of thing, and also then randomly killing people. It is the case that the numbers are still in dispute about this, but several hundred villagers were killed, 350. The estimates go from 300 to roughly 500, but in a span of just a few minutes, Charlie Company destroyed the village and killed hundreds of women, children, and old men. The event was halted when a U.S. helicopter gunship piloted by Hugh Thompson saw what was happening and flew into the middle of the village and had his gunners train their weapons on American soldiers, and basically gave the order: if you see another American soldier shoot a kid, that open fire on them, this kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing a bit here. The other thing that makes Meli horrendous was that there was a photographer present, and so there are lots of images of Meli. Well, Meli disappeared.
Well, that's what makes Meli unique, I would say.
That's right. That's fair.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that it's documented. There's a visual documentation and hundreds of images. And in fact, the photographer, whose name escapes me at the moment, is said to have destroyed many images that were extraordinarily graphic, that in fact never released those and didn't release them to the Army. Well, the Army goes through a procedure where they begin to investigate it because Hugh Thompson and others insist that this be investigated. It winds its way through military justice, largely unbeknownst to anyone. Only about a year later does the details of Meli become known. A guy named Seymour Hersh publishes an article, and then from there, it just sort of explodes in the American media, because again, there are these images. In addition to the accounts, there are these images of just horrendous violence. And eventually, the leader of C Company, one of the leaders of C Company, a guy named William Calley from Georgia, was put on trial. Interestingly, other members of Charlie Company, as well as then other leaders in the military, are largely absolved of responsibility. And the court martial basically then boils down to just sort of Calley's guilt or innocence in terms of delivering the orders and also then killing people on his own. And he's convicted. Again, it gets complicated because he's convicted and sentenced to life. Richard Nixon gets involved, mutes the sentence, and eventually the Secretary of Defense, again, condensing this greatly, but eventually the Secretary of Defense issues a pardon for Calley. And Calley ends up serving approximately 3.5 years for crimes that belie. Calley became a kind of rallying cry for the American right and for people who were, I think, supportive of the war. And so, Dave, I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts about, why a song like the Battle Hymn of Lieutenant Calley even kind of comes bubbling up in 1971. Why people bought it, why it sold records, why people wanted to hear it on the radio.
Well, the really incredible thing about this song is that it glorifies a civilian massacre, and
it does. That's exactly right.
There's no question about the nature of My Lai. That is what happened, and these civilians were part of a population that we were supposedly over there to protect and defend against aggressors from North Vietnam, right? And
that's right.
So the idea you have to destroy the village to save it was perfectly embodied here. I understand anyone who argues and says he was a pawn. He was a scapegoat sacrificed to take the heat, and it largely worked. I mean, the anger and the hatred for what happened there was centered on his figure, and the higher ups who gave him the orders were not taken into account. The fact that My Lai was one incident among at least dozens that were going on in that period in that area of the world. He was a scapegoat, but he was not an innocent man. He was certainly involved. He gave orders to others. So to make him a hero seems very, very strange. And I think it's only possible, as you say, because the nation was so divided, because pro-Vietnam forces saw anti-Vietnam people pointing to him and say, look, this is what we're talking about, baby killers and so on. And this is just pretty much a pure knee-jerk reaction to that.
Well, I think that's I share that opinion. It's it's the song itself, or however you want to the spoken word kind of justification for whatever all this went down. Eventually peaks at 37. It's it makes a kind of ripple in the popular culture. Terry Nelson was a DJ from Arkansas and hit upon this idea. A quick word: the Battle Hymn, Lieutenant William Calley, appears on Plantation Records. It's kind of interesting name. Plantation Records, though, its one kind of claim to fame was it is where Jeannie C. Riley recorded Harper Valley PTA, and so that was a very popular song in the late 60s. It's just it's 1971. It's May 1971. The United States is a week earlier had arrested thousands of protesters at Washington D.C. You have on the radio, you have Joy to the World, you have John Lennon, Power to the People, you have this Battle Hymn of William Calley. I mean, and you could hear these, they were all sort of at work in the culture at this point. It's a very confusing time. It's a very confusing time. It's a very divisive time. And obviously the United States is divided today, and it's 2021 is a very complicated time in American life. But it's not like we haven't seen complicated times in the United States before. And certainly May 1971, wow. I mean, it was just, I don't know. It was just a storm. The United States was just completely split. So I
Yes,
think,
and yeah, I think that also is an explanation, kind of, for the hedonism that we see in the later decade of the
I think
70s, and all that stuff.
I think that's absolutely right.
Kind of an attempt to put it all behind the country mentally, emotionally. We've had enough stress and
Yes.
breaking our heads about.
I think that's
that
right.
sort of thing.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And we'll obviously talk more about the hedonistic disco years coming up in future episodes. But that's it for mid-May 1971. And so, Dave, you'd like to wrap us up for today.
Yeah. If you're interested in subscribing to our channel, you can do that here. If you're wanting to find the playlist, you can do that here. And other videos of ours can be found right here.
Very good.
We
So
hope.
thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.